to order today, Monday, March 18th. Thank you, Greg, for having us all here again. And we're going to get started on the agenda. Any citizens wishing to provide input, the CRTPA? I don't have the right one, do I? It would help if I was a little bit more prepared on this Monday, and I'm not. So we're going to start the meeting over and go to number 1, call to order and roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Lori Cox.
Present.
Commissioner Hosford. Commissioner Goldwire.
Present.
Commissioner Messersmith.
Present.
Commissioner O'Keefe.
Present.
Commissioner Maddox. Commissioner Minor.
Present.
Commissioner Matlow. Commissioner Richardson.
Here.
And Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Here.
Thank you.
I'm going to move into number 2, and we have not necessarily an agenda modification, but can I have approval for Commissioner Matlow being on the phone for web access?
Second.
Any discussion? Any opposition? All righty. I'm going to move into number 3, please. Public comment on items not appearing on the agenda. Do we have any comments?
No, ma'am, we had no one sign up.
Okay. Number 4, I'm going to move into consent agenda. Minutes of the February 19th CRTPA meeting.
Madam Chair, I move to approve consent.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Minor. Thank you, Commissioner Richardson. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
No opposition. We're going to go into B, Unified Planning Work Program Amendment.
I was going to ask, we doing them individual or just?
We're doing, you know what? This is how we're going to roll today. Quincy's off her game today, and she's admitted it now for the 3rd time. I got a lot of things going on, so.
I believe you.
What? Exactly. Here we go. We're going to move into number 5 now. Are there any consent items pulled for discussion?
No, ma'am.
No. Awesome. How about number 6, roll call vote agenda items?
Yes,
Not
ma'am.
me, you.
Yes, ma'am, we have one.
Thank you, dear. Honestly,
CIP amendment, and I would ask Ms. Lex to give you a brief overview of this item. We did hand out an updated sheet. There were some typos in the one that's in your agenda packet. But Suzanne, if you would, please. Just give a quick
Yes,
review.
the amendment, I know it seems kind of odd that it's such a low amount at $29,710, but that is the actual cost for the lighting that will be provided to the City of Tallahassee, and through a JPA, they will install it. The reason it has to be put in our TIP is because it's federal funds. So in order for it to be authorized, first in our TIP, then in the state's TIP, and then the feds will authorize the funding. Thank you.
Move staff recommendation, Madam Chair.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yolanda? Yolanda?
Yes, just 1 second. Just 1 second. Okay. Commissioner Cox? Lori Cox?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's a roll call
Oh,
vote, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes. I'm voting in favor
We're just
as
all
well.
going to just, okay, here we go.
I got distracted by Mr. Rito coming in, sorry.
Oh, blame it on me.
And I'm used to being the only Cox. So I got to remember, there's a Cox and there's a Williams Cox. That's my cousin, that's my cousin.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Goldwire? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Messersmith?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
Yes.
Commissioner Minor?
Yes.
Commissioner Matlow?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson?
Yes, ma'am.
And Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Yes.
Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move into number 7, CRTPA action. I'm going to turn it over to,
I'll take it
thank you.
briefly and just turn over to Jack. We just recently completed the consultant selection process for our long-range plan update. Jack Castrua was the selection committee chair for that, so I'm going to turn it over to him and let him give you a brief overview.
Sure. Pretty much well nailed it down there, though. There's not much to say. So every 5 years, we update the long-range transportation plan. First process is to have a consultant come on board. We started this with the development of the scope of work, or actually it was a scope of work and an RFQ back in December, and we released the document in January, and then moved into a shortlisting process, which we moved everybody from shortlisting to the presentation since we didn't have a lot of submittals. So we just moved them all into presentations, and those were held last Tuesday. And what you have in your agenda item is the results of that on page 2, which is the presentation was out of 150 points. Kittleson and Associates had 133.33 points. Kimley Horn and Associates had 131.67, and RS&H had 107.5. So based on this, the selection committee recommends that we move forward with moving into the process of adoption by the CRTPA Board or approval of Kittleson and Associates for the long-range transportation plan.
Do I have a motion?
Move staff
I
recommendation.
can't give you motions.
Move staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. B, back to Jack or you?
Yes, ma'am, we'll just turn it over straight to Jack.
Okay.
We have been working on the freight plan for a little bit over a year now. We have brought it to you twice, actually. Once at the retreat in 2023 and once in 2024. So you've heard a lot about this. More recently, we have finished the existing conditions and future conditions. So we've reviewed those at the retreat in January and really started to kind of focus on recommendations and to move that project forward. So who we have here is Ricky Fitzgerald from RS&H, and he's going to do a presentation. He's going to kind of cover the existing and future year stuff just a little bit, and then go a little bit more in depth into the recommendations and needs from the freight plan. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I have a question right up front. This guy looks familiar.
Yeah, I do.
I've seen him around.
Yeah, I've presented
our
to
rail
the
guy.
board before. Thank you.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, you remember me. We'll get you.
Just want you to know we remember.
There you go. Thank you. I'm
I
glad you
believe he's
remember me
president of
in a
Amtrak.
good way, though, right?
In a good way.
All right, there you go. That helps me out a lot. So thank you. All right. Well, I'm happy to be here again. Good afternoon, everyone. Ricky Fitzgerald. I'm now with RS&H, that's Reynolds Smith and Hills. This is a planning consulting firm. So, and we were selected to do this CRTPA regional freight study. A good thing. Freight is a good thing. I hope that you can walk away with understanding that I've been talking about freight. When you heard me talk about rail, I talk about freight. It's important. So hopefully that we can share this with you. You can get some insight on it. So let's talk about the agenda real quickly. We'll talk about the study with some introductions. You heard Jack talk about, we'll discuss the existing and future conditions, talk about those impacts that are happening on those assessments. And then we'll go right into the needs and recommendations that are built from those assessments, and then hopefully we can have some group discussion. My goal is to just briefly go through each one of the slides, give you this information, but you can feel free to ask questions along the way, or you could just hold them to the end when we get to group discussion. So let's talk about the purpose and goals. So we set out to do this to identify freight movement trends and challenges, and opportunities for improvements along the region for the 4 counties. We're considering freight modes, origin destinations, types and volumes, and any potential improvements. While we were doing this, we took into account federal and state strategies and goals that they had, and we tried to align those and create our own goals, and we came up with these 6. And here are, at a higher level, the 6 goals that we have for the region. We have safety, of course. We're going to have system connectivity and function, which are important to freight. Partnership, which is very important to freight. Resiliency, which is now, of course, the buzzword and is important to freight. Supply chain, you can't have freight without supply chain and emerging technologies. We got to stay abreast of what's happening when it comes to technology and freight. So just to give you an idea of how the schedule went and why it's important to have a real solid schedule, it creates better interconnectivity between CRTPA and the research firm, which is us, RSNH, so that we can have that shared study development and make sure everything is cost effective. It also incorporates critical times, like I was talking about how important partnership is when we talk about stakeholder engagement, very important. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And also, like I was saying, it's aligning with state and federal freight project funding cycles. There's going to be opportunities to try to capitalize and leverage any funding opportunities at state and federal level when it comes to the region. Like I mentioned, stakeholder engagement, we were able to do 2 stakeholder committee meetings, and then we did 8 individual small group meetings. And also, just to know who we were talking with, Amazon, of course, is a hot topic now for the region. The county planning staffs throughout the counties, FDOT representatives, and of course, economic development staff, and to let you know that freight is multimodal, meaning that we have to include all the modes because the supply chain will reach and touch all of those. We included airport, rail, and port representatives. So let's talk about the existing conditions. Just what they say they are, existing conditions. We did an assessment of the conditions as they stand to get an impact, to see an impact of what's going on with the region, with the impact and the factors that are related to those impacts. The first one, and that you are familiar with, is the strategic intermodal system. Very important to take an assessment of this, given that you know it's a statewide high-priority network of airports, spaceports, seaports, rail terminals, corridors, waterways, and highways, just like I said, multimodal, which they are a primary means for moving people, freight, in, out, and through Florida. Why this is important for this study is that this is a state investment-focused funding that they've been doing for over 20 years. So billions and billions of dollars for SIS has gone through FDOT. And again, we want to make sure we are aligning with those so that we can try to capitalize and leverage if possible. Another important point is that with the SIS, it contains 99% of the federal designated freight network. So next up, we will talk about the truck volumes and level of service. So this is going to speak to reliability of freight movements. It illustrates where most of the trucks are moving on the CRTPA network. And notably, you'll see for US 319, and this is Leon County, you'll see where the blue for US 319, US 61, State Road 20, State Road 267, and I-10. Again, those are dark blue there, showing that with those higher volumes. Another important existing condition impact factor we consider was the employment. So here you'll see the clustering. It shows the relationship between the business clustering and development and the transportation-focused investments, meaning that the facilities such as I-10 and US 27, how they're correlated when you're looking at this graph here, this map here. It also speaks to the concentration of freight activity as it impacts to freight mobility. And you can see the larger urban core and the Tallahassee-Leon County is where you see most of that clustering. But if you spread out to the other counties, you'll see the Quincy's and the Monticellos, that they're going to have that greater amount of clustering in those urban core areas. So I wanted to talk about rail just a little bit, right? You remember me for rail. And as a matter of fact, it was actually on this subject here, passenger rail. Why we are considering passenger rail when we're talking about freight? It's because there's a shared use consideration. Passenger and freight rail generally share the corridor along that rail line, and sometimes there are some conflicts with operations. One impacts or influences the other. So during this study, we have to take that into consideration. So what we did meet with FDOT and the rail representatives for this region. Both groups indicated that the infrastructure improvements were needed, and the development of passenger rail would require coordination with the freight movements, just like I was just saying. But we wanted to make sure that you understood the position of FDOT, and you can see it here in quotes. This is quoted by them. It's potentially supportive of a service restoration in this corridor as an Amtrak National Network long-distance train that would not require operational financial support for the state. So that's what FDOT is saying about this. Again, this is important for us to understand when we're considering any freight studies and how freight mobility is going to impact the region. So we took a look at the.
1 second, we have
Yes.
a question.
You want a question now or you want to wait?
Either one, it's your show.
So translate FDOT's quote into layman's terms.
In layman's terms, I think, Greg, you said it best. You said that.
You said you were the president of Amtrak.
Yeah. Say, yeah, it's nice to have it here, but, you got to bring some dollars to go with it, basically, what's it saying. Yeah.
Okay, so Brian, looking at you.
The department definitely supports passenger rail. However, we have lots of obstacles utilizing that freight line. It's also an Amtrak rail facility, a lot of hurdles to overcome. And that goes back to the comment that we need a lot of money brought to the table in order to make it a viable option from the department's perspective.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brian. I didn't notice you there. How you doing, Brian? I don't have to answer that question anymore. All right, let's move to future conditions now. We talked about existing conditions. Let's think about where we're heading. So this is an assessment to take a look at those impact factors. First off, population. We all understand that, and you can see that top bullet. Just plain and simple, you get more people, it's going to be more demand for goods and services. More demand for goods and services mean more impact to freight mobility. So I also want to make this point about the table that you see that Florida is outpacing CRTPA. You got 18.31% growth to 11.22% growth for the region. But keep in mind, growth is growth. It's still going to impact CRTPA's freight movement. So we just keep that in mind. We use Florida as a kind of not like a benchmark, but a model to understand how growth is happening for Florida. But also we take into account the uniqueness of the region itself. Next up, freight employment. Freight labor, understanding why this is important. Freight labor supply plays a critical role in defining the freight industry's ability to respond to demands for goods and services. Notably, construction and transportation are leading it, that you can see. But I also want to point out farming and mining are sustaining. And what I mean by that is that construction growth is expected with population growth. We see it, the 11.22% in the population, but we also, the business establishment for construction is at 2%. There's not a wide base for manufacturing, which leads to shifts to more transportation and warehousing demand. So we just don't have that. It's a consumer region, pretty much like Florida's a consumer state. But we also understand that farming and mining are long-standing for this region. That's why I said that they are sustaining. Next up, we're going to look at the volume and tonnage for the freight that moves through the region. This also speaks to reliability of our freight movements. It's going to illustrate where most of the freight tonnage is moving on the CRTPA network. And then again, notably, I-10 overall is going to show most of that movement. You have some in US 19 for Jefferson and US 98 for Wakulla that's going to carry a heavier tonnage. And some of the explanation for that is obvious why I-10, being the interstate, is going to carry that. It's going to be in, out, and through the region. But then you have areas like Jefferson County and Wakulla that may have different commodity types that will have higher tonnage, so that could be one of the reasons. So with those two assessments, we did the existing and the future, which kind of generates where we need to go and what recommendations that we have for the region. So with that, the best way to do that is to actually take those assessments and get the outputs from those assessments, and then do a performance management. So we do that by tying those to performance measures. And within these measures, they will look at the impact factors that were produced by those assessments and give us some type of direction of which way we should go. Just wanted to point out that the performance management methodology, it included applying freight-focused performance measures to the results of the condition assessment findings that we just talked about. And they use a strategy that focuses on connectivity, reliability, and safety performance on freight mobility. And you can see here connectivity measures and safety measures in the following. In the next slide, you'll see the reliability measures. So just to give you an understanding what we mean by that, those measures, connectivity focuses on the intermodal and multimodal interoperability factors of freight mobility and supply chain linkage. The connectivity, just like it sounds. And then with the safety, it's kind of obvious what safety is, but when it comes to freight, it's kind of an inverse relationship. You have a focus on factors that inhibits freight mobility and creates additional cost to supply chain operations. So more crashes is going to create more issues for freight mobility. Just give you a second to take a look at those if you had any questions. Okay, let's look at reliability measures. They focus on fluidity factors across the complete multimodal network and supply chain. So if everything is fluid and moving like it should, it's reliable. If the corridor says that the traffic is moving at 45 miles per hour every hour, then that's the reliability that the stakeholder would expect. So take all that into account. We had the assessment, we got the output, we assigned those to those quantitative measures, and now we want to prioritize them. We did quantitative prioritization by capturing the performance measurement output that we just talked about. We aggregated those outputs within a census tract boundary so that we can have some type of boundary that will give us some type of delineation. And then we placed them into one of the 3 general needs categories, which I'll talk a little bit more about. The aggregated values were then ranked with the higher values receiving a higher ranking. We did that because, again, there's a set of uniqueness to the region, and also there are no clearly defined official performance measurement targets that are set right now throughout the practice. So here you're looking at the figure or the map, and it depicts the results of the needs analysis, which you see that the darker blue census tracts, they were deemed to have the higher value and to the freight mobility within the region. So if you just take a look at that, and what you can see as a trend, that the clustering of these areas are largely bordering I-10, which is not really a surprise, and some within the more urban areas. So after we did our quantitative assessment analysis, this is how we prioritize, and this is where you're going to have our focus for our freight mobility.
Rick, if I could just interject real quick.
Yes.
One of the reasons that you see the majority of, I'm going to call it Southern Jefferson County, is that's actually one census tract in itself, correct?
Yeah, exactly, okay. Yes. So it census a large census tract, and also when you get those input factors, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was looking at that, and I said that was going to be a question. Mm-hmm. It's a large census tract, but you also have to take into account the type of industry that it may have in there. So it may have those industries that have those larger truck, different type of commodities that have heavier volumes to go through there. So it'll give you that. But it's weighed enough that it's not going to be a false positive if you get it. Not just a graphic representation, but there also is the index is actual in numbers too, that you can actually see the index. So there's going to be still some prioritization. Even though this is blue, it might not be a high blue. We are on the needs. So I talked about the needs and said there were three categories. We have the land use and policy, we have the system safety, and then we have the system capacity and efficiency. So how do we derive these needs? These are more so high level, and they work more towards strategic targeting. So they're not going to be needs that are at a site level or project level. We want to keep them at a higher level so that this leaves room to not constrain project level assessments. And that's important when you go to project level assessments. Over time, there are going to be some different outputs when it comes to assessments at that level. So we want to leave room for that. For example, such as a corridor or segment or intersection interchange improvement. When you scale it at that level, it may have a slightly different impact. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to take a look at that list for the land use and policy and the system safety needs. Needs continue. The system capacity, yes.
A question, Rick?
Yes.
Now, when you talk about,
You want the prior slide?
You want to go
yeah,
back?
the prior
Yeah.
side, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I didn't know you had changed.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. The air travel expansion,
Yes.
I mean, that's solely Tallahassee.
Right.
Talk about that, so
So,
is that related?
There's an airport in Quincy.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. With the grass.
That's right. Wait a minute now. We're probably not capturing the volume that we need to capture for cargo movement in there.
Not yet.
That's a very good point.
Okay.
But to your point, so when I said that it's multimodal, right? Think about the complete network, right? And it's multimodal. So you have rail, you have highway, you have airway, and then you also have the ports that we don't have one, but it's one that influences the region. This is all important because supply chains don't start and end only in this region, right? So if you get something that's made from China that is delivered here, it has to go through many modes. It has to go through many echelons of boundaries that you're going to see. And so all that has to be taken into account because there is a proliferation of if something is impacted at a port that is delivering that China product to you, it's going to impact you. It's going to get here either slower or not at all. So we have to take into account all those modes and how they're impacted and why.
And how they
They all interconnect, yes.
Okay.
Interoperable.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That was a good question. So with system capacity and efficiency, give you a few seconds to take a look at those. Okay. So we have the needs, and so we want to go from the needs to the recommendations. So, you know, we got a list of needs. So what are the recommendations? So before we get to that point, we talk about the planning level cost estimates. Keep in mind that these are what we call planning level cost estimates. Similar to the needs when I talked about that these planning level estimates provide a starting guidance as a high level among the 29 recommendations that we're going to show you. So to leave room for project level assessment. If we actually went to the cent on each one of these recommendations, that will put constraints on those site level and project level assessments. So we don't want to do that. We keep it at a higher level at this point. Right. So let's take a look at them. I also want to point out, to make a note, each one of these recommendations has an identified implementation phase approach. Like, we don't just say, you need to do this. We also try to put it, what I call a bite to it or a teeth to it, where you'd say it needs to happen. So we say in the short term, mid-term, or long term. And this is based off of approach to promote cost and time effectiveness for delivery. So with short-term costs, it's of course, it's going to generally cost less, and it's 1 to 5 years for delivery. This is probably more favorable for some stakeholders who need some solutions right now. Then you got the midterm costs. That's more than short term. It's going to go from 5 to 10 years for delivery, and then your long term is going to, of course, going to be those higher capital investments that go 10 plus years. And continuation of them. These are the policy ones. For the technology. So there were the three types, three category that they fell under. It was infrastructure improvements, it was policy, and then it was technology. Here's a map just to kind of show you the layout where these recommendations were. And just to give you an idea of what we mean by the different, these three different categories for the recommendations. Infrastructure, it considers implementation of construction projects or studies of the network to determine specific improvement by transportation management entities. The recommendations span from changes at a site or area to throughout the system. Policy recommendations considers systemic or institutional administrative actions that may be implemented by governing entities. The actions are designed to create official authorization and social adoption for changes at a region-wide scale or higher. And then technology recommendation considers the pursuit and capitalization of innovative products or processes that may not be conventional for the study area. The advancement are used to offer changes at a region-wide scale and more effectiveness of time, cost, production, or safety. So our next steps. So I want to just mention overall, you see that as you look at this graph here, you see build from previous efforts and data analysis. You see all the inputs there, and then you see the regional study in the center. And then you see the priorities and funding opportunities that we will try to capitalize and leverage. But I want to say overall evaluation of the region's freight mobility shows profiles what areas that are both good and are open for growth and improvement opportunities based on connectivity, reliability, and safety performance measures, as we talked about. But from an evaluation perspective, the region's freight mobility is good for its conditions highlighted by impact factors that define the benefits and needs or issues experienced by the region. We know we'll have increases in population, industry expansion. We have freight demand is expected to continue, which will lead to an increase in the demand for transportation on the transportation system. Also, freight-related development is expected to continue clustering along major corridors, as we saw on our map. The interstate will remain to be the primary freight mobility corridor. We're talking about I-10. And the region will remain largely a consumer versus a producer of freight goods. But I want to point out that this study, in conjunction with a persistent performance management program that this study is offering, it will provide an evaluation tool, and that was a major part of trying to develop when we were trying to develop this study. It's an evaluation tool that was going to give you solutions, resources for the region, and so that we can try to capitalize and leverage any other funding and policy opportunities that are out there. And with that, we can go into our group discussion.
Anybody have any questions, group discussion, any comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
do we have any funding requests into the governor's office or legislature to fund these recommendations?
To the governor's office or the legislature? No, sir. Some of these are part of our annual priority process.
Okay.
But we don't, we agency has never submitted funding requests directly to the governor nor the legislature.
It goes through FDOT?
Yes, sir. One of the things we have been talking about, if you recall, the MPOAC has a freight subcommittee, and one of the things, they are opening up applications this year for projects, and we've contemplated submitting the 2 pieces of I-10 that DOT currently has under design. The deadline for that, I believe, is March 29th. If we don't submit those this year, we will more than likely submit them next year. That gives them a bit higher priority in terms of funding out of that statewide freight network funding, I guess.
Yep. NSYS.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I am curious about the 47, the 3 different sets of priorities, mid, short, low, long,
Okay,
all
yeah.
of those.
Yes.
Can you tell me one more time about the monies on the side with regard to the priorities?
Okay, yeah, so,
I'm sorry, it was just one of those things that I was trying, yeah.
and when you're talking about when I said short, mid, and long term?
Yes.
So short term, so we phase it out like that. Again, it's based on to promote cost and time effectiveness for delivery. We take that into account when we're developing those. Short term, or they're going to most generally cost less to do short term, and they're from 1 to 5 years to deliver. Midterm costs just a little bit more than short term, but you're going to go from 5 to 10 years to deliver. And then long term are those huge projects.
After we're gone?
Yeah, then 10 plus years, and then you really have to put some work into those, yes.
Well, I do know. So can we forward to the slides? I think the first one was Bruno to something.
Okay.
It was productivity, technology, and one other thing.
Oh, yeah, so it's,
Those 47, yeah,
That one?
those right there. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so the terms on the side also are the same kind of terms in the big picture overall.
those are the ones I'm
That's what I
talking
wanted
about,
to make
yes.
sure of. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's good, thank you.
I have a question, Madam Chair. So, Ricky,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Yep.
And I'm still learning this whole process.
Yes.
So now what happens with all of this? DOT, they approve the funding? Like what, how does this get to fruition from here? DOT, are y'all on board with all of the recommendations?
Studies like this do help support our ability to
Yeah.
fund the projects. However, I will say this is a very competitive process. And so your areas, your corridors that are eligible for freight funding, those are submitted to our central office through the district. And so then once it gets there, it competes against the other corridors in the state for funding.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Like a fire hose, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Laura, you could,
Typically,
when
Brian just writes
we meet other
back.
times. you can
Exactly,
ask me
I was
about
gonna
freight.
say.
I talk about freight all the time.
Perfect. Good.
So, yeah, I can get you up to speed.
Don't meet with her about freight, please. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just another follow-up question. So, Ricky,
Yes.
when you say we're competing with the other regions, who's competing for us? You see what I'm saying? Should we be giving input into that
Oh,
process?
who's the
or-
champion? That's what.
Yeah.
Yes.
Greg, you want to answer that?
That's what I was
I mean,
saying.
because if we're, in terms of political influence.
Yeah, well, I can
if
tell you a process,
Okay.
but you know, that doesn't mean that that's the process that's required. It's not like written in stone anywhere. So from the perspective of this study, what it does, it gives you, like I said, tools and resources to be able to identify where you need to start, right? And then Greg mentioned the freight priority projects that are going to be submitted to MPOAC. They capitalize and leverage 2 fund sets, and that's the ASSIST program and then also the National Highway Freight Program, which is designated for freight funding. And that generally goes directly to central office, but you also have the other process Brian was talking about, that they send projects to him, and I think it might be Ray who does it, Ray Corbett. And Ray, he'll collectively pull those together, and they'll do a prioritization, and they'll send them to central office. Once they get to central office, they have a prioritization process, like Brian says, very competitive, that will put weights on them, and then they'll prioritize them. And if funding is available, they'll get programmed. And if they get programmed, it's a chance they can get programmed throughout 1 to 5 years over that 1 to 5 year cycle. But also they can go onto a needs list if they are not programmed. That could be recycled to bubble up the following year. And that's pretty much the a process of how it works.
Okay. So now you mentioned during your presentation that we are a consumer area rather
Yes.
than a producer.
Yes.
Does that have an influence on priority of funding for projects?
No, I say no, right? And I'm speaking from a transportation planning perspective, not a policy and administrative perspective.
Okay.
So we look at performance measures, and these performance measures are going to look at transportation principles like congestion, level of service, speed, safety, crashes, tonnage movement, and we weigh those, and then we say, okay, this where it needs to go at a higher level. In the central office, they will do the same. So once they do that, that's the quantitative approach. There's a qualitative approach that we all know about, right? That may not be written. It may be someone's desire to have something prioritized. And so that's how that works. It's always a good interest to try to champion whatever projects you have and whatever weight you have to put towards that championship. That's what I've seen and noticed in the past.
Okay. And I would think that, when our delegation meets, that maybe we should take these issues to our local legislative delegation so that they know what our priorities are.
I would always, again, I said these are transportation planning principles, right?
Yeah.
These are the principles
Yeah.
that we are applying. The quantitative, I would always use this as a tool, make sure I would talk with Greg and his team all the time before I try to do that, because if it comes to being supported, right, it has to be supported with data and numbers.
Okay.
That's where it would come from.
Okay.
And we are just this much of the pie, is what you're saying, with regard to the districts and all of the things. So, yeah, you don't have to answer, but.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have that knowledge on that one.
From the perspective of a process, you just approved a long-range plan consultant, so that gets integrated into the long-range plan, because without that, it's really difficult for us to move forward without any kind of approval by you all as part of that process to make sure that that's integrated into the plan. So it's important from that perspective, and now that you've approved that, we'll move that into the long-range plan process.
And as a matter of fact, in the agenda item, it says that, that upon, the next steps will be upon approval of this body, what will happen in the year 2050, long-range plan is anticipated to be initiated in June 2024. So it is really long-range planning. So this is just a pebble step towards that, but journey of 1,000 miles starts with each step. And so this is a necessary step.
Yeah.
And I wanted to weigh in too, because I heard the word politics or I think I heard the word politics or illusion of it. Who's championing for us? And I like the way you phrased it, Ricky, because we got to be very, very careful that you don't step on political toes. And we know in this particular district, and I may step on some, but let me go ahead. It's deep, but I'll try to swim. We've seen greater funding in other districts than in ours, for whatever reasons it have been in the past. But we've also, it has been brought to our attention by those across the street that they recognized it as well. And so what we want to be careful of is not drawing too much attention in a negative way to where we are, because people who are making decisions are human beings and they are people. And so, like us as policymakers, we have to be very careful in how we take that path. That's why it's best to go through the executive director, who will have that working relationship with the entities to be. And I know you know, 'cause former legislator, I know you know. But I'm just saying for those who may be listening, may not understand the process, there is a process, and you don't want to upset the apple cart too much, because then you could cause more harm than good. You can then find yourself not in the 2050 plan, but in the 2100 plan, and you don't want that to happen. So I'm just saying, we just follow the process to get to the wizard behind the curtain, down the yellow brick road, right?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And along those.
How are you going to follow that?
I know, how do you follow that? And I'm known to stick my foot in my mouth sometimes too, but, so how, back to your point, how do we make this a priority with DOT and such? How do we make sure that our needs are being met, whereas other, like to your point, other districts around North Florida seem to be getting a bigger piece of the pie? How do we make sure that we get some of that? I guess is my question.
I totally do, because I was going to go into, we have a jar of sugar and you can't see them, and so it's each little grain. So go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I do like to do food analogies, so go ahead and take that one.
Well, one of the things we deal with, and we talked about this last year, and I was actually going to provide you all an update. A lot of the issues within the district, let me take a step back. District 3 as a whole is the smallest district in the state. It is the, however you want to put it, least funded, lowest funded, whatever metric you want to use. One of the disadvantages that we have in our 4 counties is the lack of facilities on the strategic intermodal system. We've heard a lot about, that Tallahassee's not getting its fair share. One of the reasons is when you look at the projects that are being funded across the district, they are on that strategic intermodal system. We actually made a request last year to have some facilities added to that system here, especially in Leon County, and the department, by and large, has agreed to add most of what we asked for and agreed to look at some other ones. But going back to this in particular, keep in mind, as Ricky's very well laid out here, we have short, mid, and long-term projects. So, School Board Member Cox, going back to your question, some of the things, the smaller ones, the studies for particular areas, we'll actually initiate with our agency. Once those are done, we identify improvements. Then we work with the department to try to get some of those funded. One of the ones I noticed under the technology was dynamic message signs on the interstate. That's about Ricky, I think about a $3 million project. So that is something that we would work with the Regional Traffic Management Center and DOT to try to get those implemented. The long-term things, like we mentioned, I-10, as it stands today, the expansion of that is probably a $100 to $150 million project at least. Those are the ones that we target, those bigger, the MPOAC's freight prioritization process, working with the district and central office freight coordinators to try to get those on that funding plan. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of them, like I said, we think we can get relatively short. The bigger ticket items, those are going to take much longer. Those are the ones that will go back to the 2050 plan. Those are the ones that are going to wind up in that plan as well.
Any more? Anybody else? We're going to.
I move staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposition? This isn't roll call, is it? No. Any opposition?
Just information.
All right, hearing none, we're going to go to C, please, congestion management plan.
All right. And I'm going to pass that over to Mr. Burke, who is the project manager on this project.
Good afternoon, members. As you will recall, at your January 16th CRTPA retreat, you received an update on the development of the congestion management plan. Now, this effort was initiated in mid-2022, and it's being developed by one of the CRTPA's general planning consultants, HAF. And with that, we have here today Mr. Gary Phillips, who's going to tell you what is in that plan and some of the results of that.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, board members. Happy to be with you today. I'll go ahead and go through this relatively quickly. As Greg mentioned, this was presented at the retreat in January. Not so quickly. Yep. So USDOT does require MPOs that are in TMA areas to do a CMP periodically, and this is the process that's in front of you laid out there, and that's what we followed. Generally speaking, so we developed goals and objectives and performance measures. We identified the network to analyze. We evaluated the network in terms of the level of service. We looked at AADT as well as travel time, so facilities that were not meeting the criteria of level of service as standard. And then we'll talk about this in a minute, as well as non-recurring congestion, which related to travel time and unreliability locations. And then we took a deeper dive in some of the safety issues, because many of the areas here, congestion is not a priority necessarily or a big concern. So we looked at intersections, urban and rural segments, and identified the hotspot locations of safety issues, focused on serious injuries and fatalities. So those were our criteria, analyzing them, eventually developing an implementation plan, which I'll show you in a little bit. The CMP was developed over the course of about a year and a half or 2 years now. We met multiple times with the CMP Technical Task Force, which was members of the Technical Advisory Committee. We also had individual interviews with many of the stakeholders listed there, including the counties, public works groups, and the Regional Traffic Management Center. So the 4 goals we came up with were consistent with what's in your regional mobility plan or your LRTP. Goal number 1, of course, priority-wise, is safety. Performance measures-wise, some of the things we could look at would be the number of fatal and serious injury crashes, and I know you guys are tracking that every year. You could also do it by rate as well. Second goal was to incorporate multimodal options, so some of the performance measures associated with that could be that planning time index, which I'll show you guys in a little bit, as well as facilities that are meeting and or not meeting the standard level of service, percent of work trips made by transit, bike, walking, et cetera. Non-vehicular could be another way to measure that. Goal number 3 was to increase network connectivity. So a performance measure could be to the percent of CMP network with bike and ped facilities. And goal number 4, increase access to key destinations. And you could measure that by the population within a half a mile of a transit facility, bus stop, percent of population within a half a mile of a bike ped facility. So the network we identified, primarily we were focused on urban and rural principal arterials, minor and major collectors. Those were the functional classifications that we looked at and coordinated with the stakeholders. This shows you, I know it's hard to see, but this is the volume. It was extracted from a CMP network. So this is the average annual daily traffic AADTs. We analyzed that using FDOT's 2020 generalized service volume tables to determine the level of service letter or grade based on those area types. And within rural areas, level of service is C, and within urbanized areas, level of service is typically D. This shows you the locations in the urban inset in Tallahassee that failed to meet their standard level of service. Here's a table that actually lists the locations and tried to highlight the roads, and it's what you would expect. So locations like East Tennessee Street, Monroe, Centerville, Orange Avenue, Bannerman Road, et cetera, are currently not meeting the level of service standard. So we put failed standard there. And this is a subset. There's actually 22 locations throughout the 4-county area that do not meet that 2020 generalized service volume table requirement. We also did a refined analysis. We went back and looked at them again using the 2023 FDOT generalized service volume tables, and we did that because it takes into account context classification, which you see in that table there. So the functional classifications have been expanded to include locations that they now call context classification. So based on where you're located, the land use, the speed, et cetera, you might have some leeway in the level of service standard. And that came to be, there was 4 locations that and were in Gaston County that no longer did not meet the standard. They actually met the standard doing this revised analysis. But essentially, it's very much the similar locations you see there all as well failed the second analysis or refined analysis. So that was the congestion analysis. We also looked at, for non-recurring congestion, we looked at travel times. So that's the planning time index, the PTI. That's for determining how reliable a segment is. And so Ricky was describing earlier, these are, reliability is a huge issue for freight. Well, it's an important issue for us traveling the area as well. So the PTI was put together, and you see these yellow and red locations, which are the ones that had the highest planning time index. So the first one there, northbound Varsity Drive, this is directional. PTI is 3.12, so instead of taking 5 minutes to get to your arrival, it would take you 3 times that, or about, let's say, 16, 17 minutes. So it's a big delay that's not anticipated in these locations. It doesn't happen every day. It's not recurring congestion. And you see the list of locations with the top daily PTI. And then we also looked at the peak hour associated with the plane time index throughout the region and came up with the top 10 locations for the peak hour. And some of those are locations that we just talked about a second ago, and some are unique locations, but we have all those identified in this study. And as I mentioned earlier, because congestion is not necessarily a huge issue in some of the other locations, in the rural locations, we took a deep dive into the safety areas in the 4 counties, and we emphasized or looked at the priority of locations where you have fatalities and serious injuries. And the criteria was you had to have at least 3 fatal or serious injury crashes to be selected. This shows a graphic showing the urban inset, and those are our top 10 roadways with the hotspot segments. And this is a list of those. So Railroad Avenue between West Gaines and Robert and Trudy Perkins Way, St. Augustine Street, Hardaway Highway, which is in a rural area, West Pensacola Street, et cetera. So these, again, are the top 10 hotspots, both rural and urban. And then we also did an intersection.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
before you go on to that slide, I'm sorry. You want to go back to that one?
Yes.
Yes, the number 1 hotspot there, Railroad Avenue.
Based on the crash rate, looking at fatalities and serious injuries only, yes.
Okay, so my issue is that Railroad Avenue only goes from Gaines to FAMU Way, where there's an intersection, and then that's where Wanish Way begins on the other side. So are we talking about between Railroad and Wanish and FAMU Way, or are we talking about where Wanish Way begins and goes to Trudy Perkins?
Oh, okay.
Because there's 2 different segments there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is including both, but yeah, I hear you. It's between West Gaines and Trudy Perkins Way. That was the analysis segment, and the 6,300 ADT that's there.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, it's a short segment.
Well, yeah, I read what it said, but I'm saying that there's 2,
It's 2
so it's
different
the
pieces, I got you.
combination.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We also looked at hotspot locations for intersections. So within 350 feet of the intersection, that classified as an intersection crash. We have crash rates associated with those locations. And so this is a list of the top 10 intersection hotspots throughout the CRTPA region. US 98 Woodville Highway has the highest crash rate. And again, I want to emphasize this is based on the serious injury and fatal crashes. It's not the intersection that has the most ADT. It's not the intersection that has the most crashes. It's focused on serious and fatal crashes as a criteria. And it gave us a good, so it brings in some other locations that don't necessarily have high traffic volumes, but they have had fatal and serious injury crashes. Yes?
Got a question?
Commissioner Richardson?
Yeah, well, one thing, a question and a comment. Question, in your chart in our agenda book, page 9, it has Orange Avenue and South Adams ranked as number 3, and you have it ranked as number 4 on that chart.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how much of a difference that makes, but then my comment is because my wife and I were involved in an accident at that very same intersection where our car was totaled. And I'm through that intersection all the time. That's how I come up South Adams to the City Hall primarily. But one of the dangers of that intersection is people running the red light. I mean, they'll be a half a block away. The light will turn red, and here they come. I used to have to tell my daughters all the time, when you go through that particular intersection, do not take off when that light turns green. You let everybody come through the red light who's coming, and it happens a lot. And like I said, that's been my personal experience. Same thing happened to my wife and I. We were making a left from Orange Avenue on to South Adams. A kid came through running the red light and just ran right into us, didn't slow down a bit. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but that is a terrible intersection. And so I'm glad to see that some attention has been brought to it for some improvements. But a lot of it is people running that red light rather than the design of the intersection.
And Commissioner, if I could just briefly point out, you'll see, I think, a little bit more in Gary's presentation. I don't know that it's specific, but one of the things we do as part of this is make some general recommendations when we look at the causation of crashes, what could be done to prevent some of these. That'll be kind of phase 2 of this, is we'll go and do a little deeper dive on a lot of these. But I'll tell you up front, red light running is a hard one to fix.
Yeah.
Short of a red light camera, and I know how those things go over. But yeah, certain things, I like to say, you just can't fix. I mean, if there's a geometry with the intersection or adding a turn lane or something, those things are easy to do. But people running red lights, other than just sitting there with a law enforcement officer all the time, they're practically impossible, to be honest, to fix.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just glad some attention has been brought to it.
So as Greg just mentioned, we did develop potential countermeasures at locations where there were safety issues, intersections as well as the urban and rural segments. And to do that, we reviewed all the safety reports, the police reports in detail, identified the causality of those crashes, and then did field reviews for every location. So for an example, for all 30 locations, for example, this is West Thorpe Street and Old Bainbridge Road, and you see that's a skewed intersection, spread out pretty far. A couple of things that potential countermeasures would be to change the signal timing so that your northbound and southbound left turn phases are protected only, so you would not be able to make those movements unless you had a green arrow. Pavement markings would also improve the safety because of the skewed and the separation. Sometimes it's hard to determine exactly where your lane is. From a pedestrian detection perspective, you could convert the pedestrian detectors to countdown and audible, as well as consider exclusive pedestrian phases in the signal timing as well. For the rural segments, in general, the issues that are associated with these crashes are high-speed, horizontal curves, and off-road crashes. And so some of the common potential countermeasures would include patching some of the shoulder ruts, which I'll show you how bad it is in some locations, horizontal alignment and speed advisory signage, as well as installing rumble strips either longitudinally or along the center line and outside lane of the roadway. So you see that picture, the running picture there, and that's a location where there really is no opportunity to recover at all. If you go off the road even an inch, you're going to be in trouble. So potential countermeasure would be to fix that running on the shoulder. We had some suggestions, even adding, a 4-foot shoulder in some locations that just don't have any shoulder would be great. And again, installing rumble strips, and just overall the pavement condition in this location wasn't poor to satisfactory. For the urban segments, typically the crashes can involve bike and ped conflicts, as well as rear end, side swipes, left, right turn, and angle crashes you would expect. And as a result of that, potential countermeasures could be enhanced pedestrian facility crosswalks and signage detectors, providing a median for refuge installation, and improving sight distance. This is West Pensacola Street between Appleyard Drive and Maybury Street, and this has gotten attention from DOT, from others for safety issues. In fact, they've looked at that. I know there's lighting improvements that are coming, but for potential countermeasures that we listed, it's just a high pedestrian traffic area, so you could install a median. It's currently a 5-lane continuous turn lane in the middle. For pedestrian crossings, you could relocate some fencing, other material that is impacting the sight distance, a very simple fix. And again, the pedestrian detection thing, you convert to an audible, and even look at opportunities to install the rectangular rapid flashing beacons that you see at several locations throughout Tallahassee area. So we looked at, I know I went pretty quick, but we looked at the recurring congestion, which is related to level of service issues. So this is a list of some of the projects and strategies, and I think the good takeaway from this is that a lot of the locations where you're not meeting level of service standards are already they're in the pipeline for projects, or they're being addressed. And so I wanted to show that. Obviously, we wouldn't go back and do a deeper dive because these are all being looked at, but for example, Thomasville Road, that section, and also Monroe Street, DOT is currently doing a study through Midtown, picking up a section of Monroe Street for improvements. Orange Avenue is being looked at and designed right now by DOT from going from 2 to 4 lanes from Wanish to South Lake Bradford Road. Bannerman Road in rural areas also being looked at for a 2 to 4 lane section. West Thorpe Street will be under a PD&E study to look at operational improvements. So again, it just shows you there is progress being made on a lot of these segments that are not meeting the level of service standard. Crawfordville Road, if you've been down there recently, a lot of widening going on, and there's widening in the LRTP for additional. We also looked at the non-recurring congestion. So this is not all those locations, but generally these locations are not ones where you add capacity. They don't fit that. There's no right-of-way available. So really the only things you could do would be looking at accessibility issues and queue lengths and trying to optimize the signal timing to get as much traffic through that intersection as possible. And that's really what you would do for all these locations that are listed there. So in conclusion, as part of the regional mobility plan that you talked about a little while ago, the LRTP update, we would recommend that you consider the road-based segments that were identified in the study, not the ones that already have work being done or in the pipeline, but those other ones that have recurring and non-recurring congestion, and look at opportunities to further evaluate them and program them in the regional mobility plan. For those 30 locations that have safety issues, the desire would be to try do some additional analysis, a deeper dive of those locations, and come up with improvements, not just looking at the traffic necessarily, but also at the right-of-way and the overall picture of that intersection in the rural area of the segment, and then program that accordingly. The CRTPA should monitor the effectiveness of these improvements in concert with their local partners, see how effective they are in the future, and then also periodically we want you to evaluate, you should reevaluate the performance measures I talked about, the metrics that we established and see. So from a safety, multimodal, connectivity, and accessibility perspective, how are things trending? Are we heading in the right direction? Should we make some changes in those types of projects in the future? That's it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the data that you used in the study, what period of time did that cover?
That covered 2017 to 2021, okay. 5 years. And then we did pick up 2023, as I mentioned, for the level of service. The study went on a little bit longer than we had planned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, you all have heard me talk about this a number of times, but I noticed that in your presentation, the segment of Orange Avenue from Spring Hill to Wanish Way was mentioned like 3 or 4 times, in addition to that intersection. I can tell you, because I live just off of that segment of Orange Avenue, it's terrible. Morning, afternoon, FSU football Saturdays, when they route traffic to Orange Avenue from the football stadium. And so 2 questions. One is, I really would hope that we would make that a priority in terms of our recommendations for funding. I know it's already in the design phase, so we've gotten that far. We did the PD&E, we're in the design phase, but that segment of Orange Avenue really needs some immediate improvements. And so I would hope that we, Madam Chair, could make that one of our top priorities, if not the top priority. And that goes back to my question about championing projects. Because if we could do that, I would certainly be in our local delegations' offices asking them to champion that. I would be at the DOT talking to staff because I have firsthand experience with that segment of Orange Avenue and know that it really is in need of those improvements as soon as possible.
Greg, you want to?
Sure.
Thank you.
First of all, Commissioner, you're taking up half of my report. I was going to talk about Orange Avenue.
Okay.
Based on your questions, last month we actually had a meeting with the design team about 2 weeks ago. They're at about 90% plans now. The department has basically asked them to put them on hold because of lack of funding for right-of-way. I did have a meeting last week, my quarterly meeting with DOT administration in Chipley. They actually brought this one up and said that's one of their top priorities. They're just struggling, as always, with the funding. I believe with the funding of the last piece of Capitol Circle, Orange Avenue should move up to our list, number 2 or number 3. I was actually trying to pull the priority list up, with Woodville Highway still being at the top of our list because that's the one that needs right-of-way and construction. So it is one of our top priorities, and I will tell you the district specifically brought Orange Avenue up last week in our conversation.
Good. Glad to hear that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
It reminds me of that crosswalk.
I was going to say, I did not see NIMS Middle School anywhere on this
Should be happy
thing,
with the
but
crosswalk
okay.
for several years.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, any more questions or discussion? Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. Do I, no more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Turn D over to you.
7D, I will take
Dave
this.
down.
This actually is this was originally on your all's agenda back in November. There was a few questions at the time, and Commissioner Naismith requested to table this item so he could go back and talk with the town of Havana.
Right.
So Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you and let you relay the conversation that you had with them.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Slay. And thank you, Board, for giving me a timely opportunity to have that discussion with the town manager. It was a very informative meeting. And Greg, I'm going to come back to you because you actually helped clear up some of the lingering questions that I had regarding that issue because of your previous involvement with that topic. But whenever you talk about closing a road as opposed to expanding, that's going to raise some eyebrows. Yeah, so when you talked about reducing the road going through Havana, and most of us are familiar with that little, and I was really nervous because I didn't know exactly how long it was. And when you're talking about reducing roads, you're thinking about emergencies. You're thinking about, that's 27. That's a major thoroughfare that connects Florida and Georgia. But again, thank you, Board, for giving me an opportunity to come up to speed on that issue. I did get a chance to speak to the town manager. Really, at the end of our last meeting, I just drove straight there. I said, I'm not going to come back to another meeting without having an in-depth discussion with the town manager. And we were there for a minute. And again, my primary concern is a number of issues. One, that's right downtown. And I didn't know, one, how that would affect the city because there are a number of commercial businesses in that area. As well as there's pedestrian walkway on the side of the road. And she stated that that was really the impetus for their desire to reduce traffic going through that. And Greg, correct me, if it's less than a mile, it's...
Yes, sir. And I don't think it's not just correct, but I don't think it's necessary to reduce the traffic. It's more so to slow it down a little bit and provide more pedestrian areas for those merchants that you mentioned along the corridor.
Right, and that is absolutely correct. And when I say reduction, I mean right now it's 2 lanes going both directions.
Yes,
right, so they want to
make it 3 instead of 4.
Right, they want to have 2 lanes with 1 in the middle.
Right.
Okay, yes, because we don't have there's no turning lane.
Well, no, actually, no, they want to reduce, and Justin Ford, who works with the town on this project, Justin, if you want to come up and maybe answer some of these questions, but
yes.
My recollection is that the proposal is to have 2 northbound lanes and 1 southbound lane. Justin, I'll let you.
That's correct. So, good afternoon, Board. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak on behalf of the town of Havana. So about a year ago, the town asked us to assist them with some planning work to help revitalize their downtown area. And one of the major concerns was the lack of walkability of that area because of the proximity of the travel lanes to the pedestrian facilities there. Right. If you've been in that area, it's very tight. It's uncomfortably tight to walk along those sidewalks along 27 in that area. So we evaluated a series of options and actually fell back to a report that this board had commissioned years back to evaluate that lane reduction. And that report actually recommended, I believe, as you were saying, a double left turn, a single northbound, a single southbound, and a double left turn. I may be misrepresenting that, but that's my recollection. After some conversation with FDOT and members of this group, it was determined that because of the concerns with evacuation, that we would leave it with 2 northbounds and a single southbound. Any combination of that is acceptable to the town. The intent is to reduce the 4 lanes to 3 lanes and add that space that we gain adjacent to either of the pedestrian facilities on the east and west side of the roadway. They feel like this is critical to the economic viability of that downtown area, and we concur. At this point, we're just looking, the town is not in a position financially to move forward with this. DOT has made it clear to us that if it does move forward, that somebody else needs to find a way to pay for it.
Sounds familiar.
Right. This is not something that is going to happen in the immediate future. We just are trying to set the table and have it as an option, so when that time does come, that all parties are on board.
Anybody have
a long-range plan?
The study that we did, I think we finished it right around the time COVID hit. So I think our recommendation actually was, Justin, the 2 northbounds and 1 southbound lane. But things just kind of fell apart with COVID, and we never moved forward. From an evacuation standpoint, I would tend to worry less with the 2 outbound lanes and those single southbound lane, because most folks are evacuating generally at the same time. You also have 319. You have other routes that folks can evacuate. They're not all going to go up US 27. So ultimately, we felt, that was a good trade-off in terms of what the town was looking for to improve the pedestrian facilities in their downtown.
And thank you, Justin, for that clarification. And Madam Chair, I was very pleased that while speaking with the town manager, that they held numerous community meetings
Good for them.
with businesses as well as citizens, and I was extremely appreciative of that.
Exactly.
So thank you. Thank you, Justin.
Any more questions for Justin? Thank you, Justin.
So we'd still need a motion.
To seek approval of the resolution.
So move, Madam Chair.
Second.
I have a motion. You've been quiet today. I have a motion and a second. Any
My second
discussion?
come in when I'm
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Passes unanimously. Whew. Number 8, Bryant Polk.
I almost feel like I'm letting the group down, but
Nah.
I have nothing for the good of the order, but I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody may have.
Any questions for Bryant?
Madam Chair, I have
Yes.
a random question.
Please
that
do
I
it.
got asked recently because this area is part of the district that I serve also. Orchard Pond Road, and then it dead ends into Old Bainbridge. Has there ever been discussion about opening that all the way to Highway 27 to make that, you're coming down 27, you get on Orchard Pond and come across to
Not to punt,
Council
but
Road or
that would be
whatever.
a local government decision.
Okay.
The department would coordinate with that, because it would ultimately access our facilities. That would be something that, similar to the city or town of Havana, that would be at the locals' expense.
Okay, all right,
glad-
locals, I'm bringing that up. I guess that involves you.
For the record, that is outside of the city limits.
Correct. I'm referring to my 2 county
Yeah,
commissions.
yeah, just, for those who are watching, I wanted to make sure you understood that.
Thank you, thank you.
Any more questions for Bryant? Okay, we're going to move into number 9.
You all eviscerated most of mine.
Oh, that's
The
sad.
only thing I've got left, just to let you all know, we're continuing work on the North Monroe Safe Streets for All implementation. We'll be reaching out to probably City of Tallahassee and Leon County to get letters of support as we go through that application process. It's due May 16th, I believe. So, Madam Chair, that's all I had. I don't think we have anything else that I've forgotten.
You have any?
Go ahead.
Just to say the updated UPWP, which has the appendices, and our final budget, we have some money that will be moving from the current UPWP. I wanted clarification before I put that money in there, even though it is draft tentative, and we'll be bringing the final back to you in May. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
That's it. Number 10,
Just your meeting next month and our committee actions related to the things you had today.
number 11, any items from CRTPA board members? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to remind folks that Wanish Way, if all goes well tomorrow, looking at the county, if all goes well, Wanish Way will get a new name, Althea Gibson Way. So just to keep that in mind, and just
Railroad.
it's a very good thing to be able to do this, and I had an opportunity to be interviewed by WTXL about it. Althea Gibson, as we all know, a renowned tennis and basketball and golf player who was a student at Florida A&M University, and she broke several color barriers in the world of tennis. And she's also my sorority sister, a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. So I'm doubly proud of the fact that Althea Gibson Way will be named for her, and running through the campus of Florida A&M. So the county commission it's on county commission's agenda for tomorrow. And the actual renaming and ceremony will be announced in the near future. So just wanted to put that out there.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. Oh, I skipped you, didn't I? I haven't heard from him today, so yeah, there we go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just real quick, I wanted to let you know the Orchard Pond Parkway, I believe it's a toll road. I believe it's a private toll road.
It is.
So, yeah.
If from a county perspective, I'd also wait to hear from the owner.
The owner of the road?
If they want to connect it, but just to let you know that.
Family.
It is.
That we do have, that I did.
That section is, but I don't know if continuing if it would be. So that's a great point.
It is, yes. It's always who's going to pay for it, and but it's good to know that there's an interest in it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Greg for allowing me and sharing that information with me to attend that Metropolitan Transportation workshop in Orlando at the Florida Hotel. It was phenomenal.
Good.
Yeah, and I'm probably the only one that has not attended, at the table. But it was just fantastic training, and it's just amazing how much I just do not know, as a commissioner. So thank you for providing me that opportunity.
Glad you're able
and
to go.
Any other workshops you think I need to attend, because it was just phenomenal training. So I just want to share that with the board.
Thank you. Oh, hi.
Hey, Madam Chair, how are you today?
Good.
Wake up.
Just, I'm awake. Are you awake, Commissioner? I'm well awake.
I know you are, Rick. I'm just
Okay.
having fun with you.
Just wanted to thank CRTPA and RSNH team for doing the walk on Friday up North Monroe. Spent some time with them that afternoon. It started out cloudy and it got sunny as soon as we started, so I turned into a lobster by the end of the 4.5 hours, I think, but it was time well
wild.
spent. So just wanted to thank all of your efforts on that, and looking forward to seeing the application when it's ready. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes.
Oh, goodness gracious.
You
Yes.
know.
That's why I didn't look over there.
Oh, no, yeah. We did have a brief conversation about rail, but Greg and Commissioner Minor, we've had a lot of talk in the news lately about Amtrak and what's going on. And, everything I saw and heard, I shared with you because I know what our conversations have been. Can someone enlighten us on all of the activity that was occurring last week or the past couple of weeks with the petition and all of these things and conversations that we've had Commissioner Richardson and I sit on the Tourist Development Council, and with all of the conversation going on, the Tourist Development Council is now ready to do a letter of support, which I support, made the motion to do that. As you all know, that I'm very passionate about Amtrak, and had another early morning text discussion with one of the locals who is my rail constituent, one that, you know, I'm trying to respond to about what's going on. So can you please clarify for all of us what the activity was? I know Commissioner Minor was in the media about it, but can you tell us what all of this actually means?
Well, part of, I think, what's hit the news and the media lately is the results of some work that was done or directed out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL law, a couple of years ago. And I believe that group recommended 8 or 10 corridors.
15,
okay, throughout the country for possible service. There was a deadline of March 8th for folks to submit letters of support for their particular corridor. I am not sure, to be honest with you, what the next steps are. I have not been keeping up with that probably as I should have. But one of the things we have thought about was putting in some information on our website to provide a little bit of context. As you know, Ricky mentioned and we talked about earlier, we've still got the fundamental problem when it comes to Florida that is, at this point, you know, the department's not willing to put any state money into it. So that's a huge hurdle to have to get through. I mean, I think it's encouraging, but it's, you know, the biggest thing I would say is it's not going to have something happen in the short term. It may be something much more in the future. But we will be putting out some information on our website to kind of provide a little context to all that conversation.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And to Commissioner Richardson's point about who's championing it, thank you again. You and I went over and met with Senator Simon about this issue, and his response was, you know, what we already kind of knew is that if this is going to be population-based, we just did not have the population for the kind of passenger rail activity that we're seeing in other places. So if that's going to be one of the factors, then that's one of the things that we have to keep into consideration. Although we think we have the population, or we think that we could have the population, by some other standard, we don't. And so we'll wait until something changes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Minor, I don't know if you saw the results. I did fill out that survey. I was concerned that it might not have gone through because I think I got a...
I've got comments.
Okay, so it did go through?
Short answer, yes.
Okay, good. Because I got a return email saying that there was a problem.
I'll address that when.
Okay. But one of the things that we talked about at the TDC meeting was the impact that could have on tourism in our area as well if we had that train service, and it would cut down on the number of students bringing cars into the community and addressing our climate issues from that perspective. So it has a lot of potential for us as a community to have that rail service reinstated. And so that's why, one of the reasons why we were so eager as the TDC to show our support for that issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, about Amtrak. And Commissioner Richardson, yes, there's a mail server issue with the Federal Railroad Administration's server in some way in the waning hours of the deadline. So it was, I think, around maybe noon or 1 p.m. on March 8th. That's when people started getting those error messages.
Okay.
So, but what they did is shortly after the deadline passed, they sent an email out to folks like yourself that sent an email and got an error message back saying that their message was received and recorded.
Okay.
So you should be in good shape. We got a number of people that had some issues at that time, but it seems, based on what the FRA has said, that your message, as well as those of others, have been captured.
Okay, good.
So, and just a little more information on, so the reason why all this came about was that the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL, basically mandated Amtrak to conduct a long-distance rail study to figure out where, if you take a look at the nation, where might we apply some visioning exercises to fill in gaps. to connect areas of the country that are not currently connected, either because there never was a route there or there was a route there that was discontinued, such as ours. That's one element of that. The other element was to try to make transportation more accessible in some of our rural areas of the country. So because of that study, they have an interim report that produced 15 proposed routes, of which Dallas to Miami is one. Dallas going through Pensacola, down to Baton Rouge, LA, New Orleans, Pensacola, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, and then south to Miami. It doesn't mean they're doing it. It just means that they're considering that route. And so there was a public input phase where we had until March 8th to provide as much public input as possible. So what the goal was for us to have people in Tallahassee, all throughout North Florida. We actually had people in Alabama that were submitting input to basically let the Federal Railroad Administration know that there's a lot of interest on that route. What happens next? So they're going to take that input. They are going to take that interim report that's available now and produce a final report to Congress later this spring or early summer. We hope that when they produce that final report to Congress, the Dallas to Miami route, including Tallahassee, will be one of those 15 routes. So the goal of collecting that input was to make sure that we weren't outcompeted by other parts of the country that wanted to have routes that were not one of the 15, take Dallas to Miami out and put their route in.
Exactly.
That was the really important part for us to make sure that we had public input on that Dallas to Miami route. I think we achieved that. So we'll wait until that final report is ready when it's sent to Congress. I think we're going to be fine, but let's say that Dallas report, that Dallas to Miami route is in there. The next step then is to advocate for the Florida legislature and the governor to support us joining the Southern Rail Commission. That's the commission that currently has Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana already in it. Now, those three states are part of the SRC. Lo and behold, they've actually got the Mardi Gras route going from New Orleans to Mobile, connecting them with the rest of the country starting sometime this year. They've had some issues with the Mobile train depot that has caused some delays, but my understanding is that they're going to have that route running this year. When that route is operational, that should put more pressure upon us in North Florida to connect with the rest of the world with passenger rail. So step one is to make sure that our route is presented in the final report to Congress. Step two is to respectfully request from the state of Florida that we join the SRC. Step three, which is the big one, is finding the money for it. Yeah. That's the big one. So, however, I think we all should be more optimistic than we have in prior years, because with the passage of the infrastructure law, the infrastructure bill, we now have money going to rail in this country that we haven't had for many, many years. Most of that money has been going to the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states, because there's a whole, there's a very dense rail infrastructure up there that needs a lot of renovation and upkeep. But there's still a lot of money available for other parts of the country. So finding the money is going to be the big hurdle. And so I think we need to make sure we set expectations. We're not going to get rail here in 2 years, but I think if we do a good job of indicating the desire for this part of the country to receive passenger rail back, I think our chances are, I think we're going to get passenger rail back. Whether it's 3 to 4 years from now or 20 years from now, depends on how well we advocate for it. And I also spoke with Senator Simon, and he had the same comment to me when I was talking to him about it, about how this area doesn't have a population density that warrants this rail. Well, my response to him was, it's not about the population density here, it's about what we connect to. So having New Orleans and everything west of New Orleans be able to come through North Florida on their way down to Orlando or Jacksonville or to the eastern seaboard, it's not just the population here, it's about what we connect to. And I think that's a persuasive argument. So we just need to keep on advocating for it. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But I'd much rather have rail 4 years from now than 2025, because the economic benefit of having rail come to us now, or 4 or 5 years from now versus 20, I think are profound. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, on point. I want to thank Commissioner Minor for that explanation, because I think that everyone who was doing the survey was just a frenzy to do the survey, thinking that it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And we know that it can, but we have to manage expectations that it's not going to happen 2 weeks from now, it's not going to happen, may not happen 2 years from now, but it can happen. And understanding what the process is, what I find is that many times people don't know what we know. And we have to explain and educate so that they understand. I did the surveys, 3 months ago, so what's happening? So we have to manage that expectation so folks will understand. We also need to keep in mind that we currently have a president who rides trains. Drop the mic.
Are you finished today?
I'm done.
Are you sure?
I'm sure. It was spring break last week.
It's spring break in Wakulla right now, and I'm ready, so, okay. Maybe that's, anyway. Anybody else, number 11, CRTPA, public, staff, Greg? How about number 12? A motion to adjourn?
Yes, so move.
Second.
Do you want a second? Okay.
We're good.
We're good. We're adjourned.